And like I said before, it's my Jeff Lucas disclaimer. We are not all attorneys, although there may be some on here, which there actually is. And everything discussed is just personal opinions and may not stand up in court. Our hope is that we can open the discussions up to the broader audience and have these ideas recorded for the next generation. There are some great high-profile boundary surveyors and even some college students from across the country on this Zoom meeting. And I hope that we can all gain a bit of knowledge from these discussions. So again, tonight is chapter 4. We got through a couple on, got through chapter 3 last week, took a couple times to get through it. And so tonight is chapter 4, which is evidence and technology. So this should be some fun ones. I wish, especially with the ever-changing technology, things are going to be changing forever moving forward on this kind of stuff. So it's going to be interesting on how this chapter kind of plays out even tonight and over the years to come for sure. So
absolutely.
What you got tonight, Trent?
Yeah, I was actually a little disappointed in this chapter. Let me just start out there on a sad
there you go. That's a good way to start.
I was expecting, as starting into this, a lot more about technology itself, the types of technology, the tools we use, how and why we pick certain tools. And so I went in kind of hoping for some of that. And I know that those that deal in the legal side of surveying more, those that deal in court cases, and the entry of evidence and technology as evidence into those, we could spend 2 or 3 weeks talking about how the courts interpret evidence and everything like that. I was hoping for a little bit more of that in this one. That said, I learned a lot from this, and I've reevaluated the way I use technology with evidence. Funny enough, I'll tell you a couple quick stories here to kind of get the discussion started. I had 2 calls today from previous employers. As I've mentioned before, I spent some time in Wisconsin and surveyed all over the Midwest. And one of the states I did a lot of surveying in was Iowa. Personally, I am not licensed in Iowa, but we had a strategic relationship with another firm that was licensed in Iowa. So that surveyor, as charged to that, would sign and stamp any of the surveys I did. And I felt a certain responsibility as a licensed surveyor, working under another licensed surveyor, not of my company. I actually did most of these surveys. I didn't feel comfortable sitting like a third rung down, so I actually went out and traveled and did all these. And he got a call, someone trying to retrace a survey. It's about 4 years old, and I had called out an original stone monument I found. And it's in a town of like 30 people in the middle of nowhere, and come up a cornfield, the cornfield kind of 90s, and then our property, kind of dog-legged around that cornfield. And so right at the corner of the cornfield, I found the old stone. And I did what I was supposed to do as the proper surveyor, is I flagged it up, I marked it up, and I could only guess that the poor farmer, after I flagged up this stone, right, found the stone. What the heck? Why is this stone in my field? I've got to get rid of it. I don't want it here. And now 4 years later, the surveyors come behind and try to find this stone, right? And so there was some interesting discussion. We'll kind of come back and forth to this, I think, a little bit in today's discussion. Is that stone was probably a 6x6 stone, right? So technology and evidence, when they set that, that's as accurate as they could get. 6-inch square, set in the stone, it's good enough. It marks the corner for whatever. Well, then I come in there with this GPS. I'm like, okay, where do I shoot the stone? Because I can measure down really precisely to where the stone is, right? And so that's a lot about what this chapter discusses is, if the stone was set then, and we're measuring with a centimeter accurate GPS now, how do those correlate legally, right? So that's kind of the first interesting thing that happened today as we were preparing for this chapter. The second one is the same company, just another survey manager. Because he kind of got the same call, because he's still there. He got the call about this stone that someone was trying to find and couldn't find, and we were just chatting for a little bit. And he brought up that he's gotten a couple calls out for some other surveyors in the Midwest that they've done, he got a call from a surveyor that he'd done a survey, and it was an ALTA survey that setting corners wasn't part of the scope of work, but the crews out there didn't understand that, and they set the corners. They didn't file a survey, so he gets the call, hey, why isn't there a survey filed? And then as they're trying to figure out why the survey wasn't filed, he's like, I'm missing your corners by an inch here and 3 inches here. And so we just kind of had a fun little chuckle at, if you're missing someone's corner by an inch or 3 inches, I mean, the corner's the corner. Like, what are you calculating to? How are you using your technology? If you think you're off when you're only missing a found corner by an inch or two, shoot, that's the corner, right? So we had some interesting chuckles about how technology works. So that's just kind of a primer there for our discussion today. This is a shorter chapter. It's only about 9 or 10 pages long, and a lot of the principles kind of bleed into each other. So I don't think that we're going to go long as we have on the other ones. And really what I think I want to do today is let's lump all these principles kind of in together. We'll go through them. We'll read through them all real fast right now. And then we'll just kind of go through the chapter, and let's see if there's things that we want to pick up or pick out. He's got a few quotes from some other books and some BLM manual, and I think we'll use those for our discussion points. But really, more than ever, I'm going to rely on everyone else to talk about the who, what, when, where, why, and how that you guys use technology so that we can all kind of learn together. So let's just kind of read through these principles. Let's get oriented with where this chapter wants to point us to, and we'll go from there.
Love it.
Principle 1, all original corner locations or positions are a product of 2 measurements, A, angle or course, and B, distance. When once created, all corners and lines created by an original survey are without error in a legal sense. All corners and lines created by the original survey should be equated in relationship to the standards of precision that were in effect at the time the lines and corners were created. And that's one, Trent, if you want to like highlight that a different color, that's one I definitely want to come back to and discuss a little bit more. Principle 4, any error present in the original surveys will be in either direction, bearing or distance. And these 2 error possibilities should not be considered to be in a direct relationship to each other. Errors may also be found in words. Each error should be independently considered in the relationship to the standard that were in effect at the time the line measurements were created. The positive position of the original corner locations or positions must be predicated on the recovery, identification, and interpretation of original evidence, and not on applying modern measurements by the retracing surveyor.
Hey,
7,
Trent,
a surveyor cannot use,
your voice is breaking up just a little bit. He's got issues with, he has issues with his Zoom, so he's having to talk on his phone and have video on his laptop. So we were going through some things earlier, but try it now and see if it's any better. I know you just
just push those headphones back in tighter there.
Yeah, it's almost 7. A little bit of a lag, I think, almost. But yep, let's go. You're good.
Okay. Principle 7, a surveyor cannot use more modern, precise techniques and measurements of course, angle, and distance to set a lost corner, but only as supportive or combative evidence in support or in contradiction of lesser evidence. And that's another one I'd like to just get some feedback from everyone else and see kind of how they interpret that one for sure. Principle 8, an original corner once created cannot be replaced or redefined by coordinates created by modern survey calculations and measurements using more precise modern methods. Principle 9, corners cannot be proved from evidence of what's found, but lines are determined from the corners found. Principle 10, an original line cannot be ascertained from a single corner, but the line must be determined from proving 2 original corners, 1 on each terminus.
And we lost him. Oh, we lost you, Trent. Trent.
You sound much better. We can't hear you, but I like the dialect.
You died.
Oh,
We're on
try this
principle
here.
10 when you get there.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, everyone can hear me now. Sorry about that, guys.
It's all good. We'll get through it. We're all right.
Yeah.
Principle,
If I
principle
have
10.
to, I'll take. I had my headphones in. If I have to take them out, I will. See if that works better.
Yeah, that might work too.
And yeah. I just didn't want all the feedback in the room and everything. If there was that. So principle 10.
That's way better. You're good.
Is that better?
Heck yeah.
On this so I can hear you guys, though, is the problem.
Yeah, just put it on speaker or something. But yeah.
Yeah, just if it's going to let me.
For those watching 10 years
there we
later.
go. Now I can. Yeah. Okay, there we go.
There you
go. Principle 10. An original line cannot be ascertained from a single corner, but the lines must be determined from proving two original corners, one on each terminus of the line. An original line cannot be ascertained with certainty with reference to, from, or to a single corner. In order to conduct measurements for replacing a lost corner, the retracing surveyor should obtain the notes of the original survey. Principle 13, any retracement of boundaries must be predicated on locating with certainty the evidence left by the creating surveyor. A retracement is not a matter of going into the field and just looking for evidence. It is a task of knowing what to look for. One must have the original created information in order to have the information of what to look for. Failure to obtain and use this information may raise the question of negligence. Principle 14, a coordinate value computed from bearings and distances is less precise as were the original values from which it was calculated. And last but not least, 15, with an understanding of the limitation of the original survey descriptions, modern technology can be used to support weak or questionable evidence quickly and with reasonable cost. It cannot be used as a substitute for evidence.
This should
be what I was thinking.
This should be fun.
Yeah. So a lot of the ones I kind of wanted to focus on or think about is that relationship between modern technology and if we will, and John taught us what ancient technology is, or ancient is anything more than 20 years, right? And so I would gather that if we take a pretty broad cross-section of surveyors in the United States, that the majority of us for any day-to-day surveying are starting with a GPS system and locating or localizing in some form or fashion to the local monuments, section corners, or subdivision centerline monuments, street monuments, found property corners, but we're localizing to the evidence found that is the controlling evidence, right? I go out and do a subdivision lot survey. My first order of evidence that I personally, as I go out and survey this, is I'm going to look for just property corners, real quick and dirty. Can I find something that's there to make my life really easy that the property owners they just don't know where it is, right? And I'm localizing my equipment to that first. Next biggest order, if I could, on a subdivision plat being an original survey, would be those centerline street monuments if they were set as part of that. Again, being as close and local as possible to my site, and then moving further out to section corners or other evidence. And I think speaking broadly, most surveyors are using that type of procedure. There might be some using total stations, but the general process is the same, right? They're going to try and get as close as possible and dialed in, and then go out to more evidence. And then once you're localized and set up, we are gathering the evidence to determine those property lines or opinion on the property lines or any other questions that might be there. So on principle 3, all corners and lines created by original surveys should be equated in relationship to the standard of precision that were in effect at the time the lines and corners were retraced. And that's why I shared that discussion of, he was hitting it by an inch. Granted, we're using GPS and people think it's sub-centimeter accurate, but
your general standard tolerance on a GPS is about an inch. So is it being equated to the standards of precision that were in effect then? Or as you're retracing original monuments, as they were measuring those out by chains, were they looking at it that way? So the question I have, and I'd love for anyone here to answer that, is how do you rectify that? You're doing a survey, you're looking at it, CAD, the county, fellow surveyors are going to look at a higher degree of precision to those numbers, the significant digits as you were. How do you guys rectify those two things or correlate those two, the modern precision to the ancient precision?
Anyone? Connie, go for it. Come on, you're unmuted. Let's go.
Let's do it.
I always have something to say.
Go for it.
To me, when let's say I'm retracing something, and I'm retracing a lot of things right now from the 1940s and 50s and before, the modern precision almost does not play a factor at all, except to make sure that I understand that my guys are using the equipment correctly. But when I'm looking at the tolerances of whether to accept or reject something, I'm looking at, is it the original monument, and does it fit the tolerances and the methods of surveying that they did back then? If it does, then I will accept that corner, especially if it in support also has a long-standing use accepted as well. Basically, just because it's 3.77 feet different from where my calcs think it has to be, my calcs is only a search coordinate at this point. And then I'm going to locate that monument, and I'm going to use in my modern survey, of course, I'm going to use the precision at my current survey to declare where I found the monument to let's say, do a record of survey. But as far as accepting the monument, unless I can somehow prove that it's a blunder that's never been accepted as a line of occupation, that original monument is getting accepted no matter where I find it.
I've had something similar here in Nevada. I had a local jurisdiction. We had a monument that we found that was 12 feet off, and we were asked to accept it by the local jurisdiction, even though it would have taken like 12 feet of land away from the jurisdiction. And I just couldn't. He's like, it's an original corner. It needs to be accepted. And so I just couldn't necessarily. I took it as a blunder more so than accepting it as the original corner. So, and it was just a traditional 5/8 rebar, right? There was no cap left on it or anything like that. So it wasn't anything of, could have been set 20 years later. It would have been a point set in the 30s or 40s or something like that from a parcel map. But so I couldn't take myself to accept something that was 12 feet off when it was just a standard rebar. So, and it was up in the mountains, and it was, wasn't going to necessarily, it was unusable land to some degree. Well, we say that in 2022, right? But come 2050 or something like that land's going to be something, because they keep building out and out and out. So, but yeah, I know we've had something similar to that situation where I've been asked to accept it, but I couldn't take myself to do it. 12 feet. Definitely in a mountainous area, was on a 5/8 rebar that had no cap on it. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And whenever a monument, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, whenever a monument is not tagged, then then it can be harder and harder to prove its pedigree. So you're not, there's some left to judgment there. And if it didn't fit the lines of occupation, then it makes sense. And that kind of falls under my thinking of, well, if you can prove that it was a blunder of some sort, and we can have a big long discussion about how to go about that. But I agree with you were talking, what you were saying, Trent.
Yeah, no, that's good. And how much of this goes back to the BLM's precision, right? It'd be interesting to go back to the original thought behind this particular principle 3 too, right? Like plus or minus, one chain, half chain, what were those precisions? And that's kind of where this alludes to being a West Coast surveyors, and so it's interesting. What do you got, John? I see you're unmuted, so I love it.
Yeah. One of the frustrating things I've had with this chapter, well, a couple of them actually, is the two things. Is originally this chapter was called Technology as Evidence. He's
Okay.
changed it now in the newer books to say technology
And evidence. Yeah.
and evidence or something like
Okay.
evidence and
Evidence
technology
and
or something.
technology.
Yeah. But he used to say technology as evidence, and the very first line in the chapter was technology is not evidence. And I wish he would have left that line in there when he changed the title, because technology is not evidence. Technology is a technique or a process, a procedure that we use to evaluate evidence, to analyze the evidence that we recover. The second problem I have, or the difficulty that I have in this chapter, is that he's talking about original corners and original, measuring corners and lines, corners and lines. We don't survey corners and we don't survey lines. We survey boundaries and we survey monuments. Monuments are physical evidence of the boundary. A boundary is a physical object by law, by legal definition. They're physical objects. And a lot of this chapter leans toward the idea of coordinates, calculations, and things we do with technology. And talking really and intermixing then the idea of monuments, which are original monument is accurate, has no error in precision, the error in its position, as opposed to technology that always has error in its precision error, not accuracy error. And so we start confusing accuracy and precision and misusing those terms. And misapplying them, and he does it consistently throughout this chapter, really talking about, he mentions accuracy when he's really talking about precision, and doesn't really even sometimes use the term precision. But that's really, I think, what really boils down to here is the trying to separate those ideas. We're going to use our technology to go out there and get, like Connie says, the search area, a pre-calc, a position where we hope to find the physical evidence of this monument. We search for the monument, we find the monument 3.77 feet off, and we can say from the characteristics and stuff, yeah, that is the original monument. We look at lines of occupation, like Connie said, and if it's in harmony, all that evidence now is start to corroborate the fact that this monument is the original monument. The technology, on the other hand, is saying, okay, the technology is saying, well, it's not at the point or at the computed or preconceived position. Is it now reasonable that it's within this certain amount of error or precision? That's where we can look at the standards of measurements and say, okay, those standards used to be 1 in 300 when this survey was done, or 1 in 1,000, or 1 in 500, or 800, or 1,200, or whatever precision it was done at the time. And that helps us to determine the error of the amount of the circle of error that we can expect. So we have our precise position of our technological position, and then some supposed or surmised, at least, circle of error. If that found monuments within that circle, it gives us comfort because we can now use our measurement, even though it's 3.77 feet off, to corroborate the monument itself, and say, yeah, the monument is within the standard of care. And so that gives us another piece of evidence now that we can corroborate. But we're using that technology as a means of analysis, not as a means of evidence, because evidence is, the physical stuff that we're trying to prove. The physical stuff, the documentary evidence, the testimonial evidence, and the physical demonstrative evidence. But it helps if we can kind of separate those terms in our minds and think, when he's saying corner, just put the word monument in there, and it kind of brings it to a whole nother level of understanding, I think. Original monument locations and positions are a product of two measurements. Yeah, somebody went out there and measured an angle and a distance and set this point at this monument on the ground, this physical object. The goal is now on the retracement to find it. So I think it kind of helps to have those things distinguished in our mind to understand really what he's trying to say here. I think he does a fairly rough job of it, but the meat of the matter is there.
Those are great points. Yeah. Be interesting, like we talk about, right? Like through the different versions of the book, how much has this particular chapter changed? That would be something to really go back and kind of analyze as well. That's a great point, John. That's a great point.
As I've been teaching the boundary law classes, and I use these books, this one as well as the boundary control legal principles, I have collected an entire set of each one of these books. And so first thing I did when I get this 7th edition is I pull out my 6th, where I've already highlighted all the changes. Yeah. And then I look at, okay, what's changing now in 7, and see what kind of, how this thing has morphed over time, and what insertions and what things have happened.
Yeah, I could imagine going back to version 1 of this and see what it says, right? That would be fantastic. Yeah. I think we got rid of a version 2 at the conference, but I don't think I've seen the version 1 before. But yeah, that's great points.
Okay, great. Oh, I think to just continue on with what John's talking about, if you jump Trent over to 4.6, the end of 4.6, almost 4.7, he gives a great example of these precisions that we look at, right? Mm-hmm. The bearing could be 55.5 degrees to 56.5 degrees, because the technology they were using at the time was a compass that only could be read at half-degree intervals. So I'm going to make a bold statement here and kind of go back to what I was talking about, is our survey procedure, right? We kind of hint at this occasionally in this discussion, but our survey procedure, I send a crew out and I go take an original survey or BLM notes or whatever it is, and I go plot out a section, and I say to my crew, okay, go set up on this section, right? And we use Trimble, so the term is calibration, top cons is localization, whatever it might be. But I say, I want you to hold the southwest corner of this section, and they're going to do this tomorrow morning. I want you to hold the southwest. I know the south isn't in because it goes through the freeway and it's not monumented by any reference monuments. And I want you to then shoot the southeast corner, and I want you to localize or calibrate to those 2 monuments, right? So in old terms, right, you're setting up the gun on the southwest, and you're getting your 3 prism out, and you're back sighting the southeast a mile away, right? And so you're turning, essentially what you're doing is you're turning that GPS with its different sets of errors, and then you're turning that line, and then everything you do mathematically is kind of coming off of that plus or minus your GPS error. But when you were using the gun, right, you set this baseline, and everything else is kind of calibrated then to that. They're doing the same thing here with this, but there was error in that measurement. And so if we go to retrace this, are we thinking about that in either our search area or the way we describe our evidence, our narrative, our, whatever it is we go and we do our retracement survey, and we put new bearings and distances around that because we measured it better with new equipment and the GPS, and it was 55.5, but really it was 55, 30, 26, right? Or something, or 26, 26, whatever it might be. And we go throw that on our survey. Do we ever, and the question I have is, do we ever throw homage then to those original numbers? Do we do hey, this is record, but this is how I got here more precisely with today's instruments, right? To help the next person out. And so I'd be curious, I kind of want to throw that out, maybe just if anyone's willing to embarrass themselves or not. We won't judge you if you do or don't, but maybe some of the younger guys that are on this, is that concept something new to you? Or are you just going out there and turning on the GPS and running with it?
Not every job started in state plane.
I don't.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I don't.
I'm kidding.
There, well, you say that, but I can
know.
call two surveyors that work in the area that,
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about this a couple chapters ago, how Davis County, the county I work in, is requiring a NAD 83 rotation on everything, despite a very historic rotation through the county.
Yeah.
So there are some surveyors, and they'll turn on the GPS. They won't even calibrate or localize. They'll just say NAD 83 state plane, Utah North Zone, and
Yeah.
they'll go out. And if they're within just 2 or 3 seconds of what the published NAD 83 from the county is, they'll run with it. And that personally gives me heartache, right? Because I'm just turning it on and going. I'm not, for me, it disrespects the original monuments that might be found.
Well, and I guess as we move forward, right? So the 2022 datum, whenever it's released, right, is going to be full of LDPs, low projection, LPDs, low projection systems. And so the start of just turning it on with a low projection datum and running is going to be the new norm, right, in the next 5 years. And so that's going to be, that's kind of how it's going to be moving forward. So this brings, version 8 is going to bring into play low projection datums, right? And so it's going to be interesting. I know, Jonathan, you unmuted yourself. Did you want to jump in? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. What was your question again? I apologize, Trent.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see.
I'm a new surveyor in the Fresno, California area.
Oh, perfect.
No man's
great.
land. Yeah.
No, I was just trying to get a feel for how many people sit there and localize to a local monument system, the rotation of the plat or survey you're retracing, or how many people just kind of turn on the equipment and go. They have their own rotation and run with it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I've gotten into trouble with that. I ran with a few of them because I just figured that the what is that called? The gosh, I'm out of it today. I'm sorry. The NGS points or whatever that are set.
Stations.
Yeah, but they're set with really high precision and everything like that. And I get elevations from that. And so I'll go set on that. And maybe it's, I don't know, quarter mile, half mile away from the project. And then I'll just go and I'll so I set on that and then I go and run and shoot my points in and everything. And a lot of people have been like, okay, now we need you to use, but at the same time, so I'll set that as my base point to make sure I'm getting elevations that are trackable to the nav 88. And then I'll go in and shoot original corners all around, obviously, to establish where my actual boundaries for my project are. And I know I'm probably doing everything wrong, but that's essentially how I do it. And I kind of sit there and I go, that's not a big issue for me because I want to make sure I'm real precise on my vertical control. And then since I tag in all these other ones after I've calibrated to navigate the NGS coordinate, then I feel like I'm good, because if I can grab especially all 4 corners in a section, or whatever quarter section that I run into, then I feel like I'm really located on the position, and then go from there to original corners that I can find on the project.
So what would your coordinate system be? State plane? So you're starting a job in state plane, keying in that coordinate for your base, and then going?
No, actually, this is really good that I'm here.
Because the core stations will give you geographical coordinates, and then when you're post-processing, you have to get whatever state plane coordinate system and epoch you're going to be using locally.
Yeah, so this is a really good point. I think this is something I really need to kind of be educated on. Is I'll grab that, and then, but I'll keep it, I won't keep it state plane coordinates. I'll keep it just local coordinates using a geoid model, and then I'll go in and shoot that stuff. And I figure within a quarter mile or a half mile or something like that, I'm not going to get too much of a contour on the Earth's surface. And so I think it's ideal for local surveys. I haven't had to deal with, okay, now I've got miles and miles of survey and I'm dealing with an actual rotation of the Earth.
Right. So what would your coordinates be? Would they be 10,000, 10,000, 5,000, 5,000? Or are you dealing with, 2 million? What's your coordinate? Yeah, 10,000.
I do 20,000, but they're
Oh.
within 1,000 or 2 of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So he's doing a localized. Yeah.
localized, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a lot of discussion about how you localize. I'm a 5,000 guy.
Okay.
But there's a company that I've worked with out here that they do a modified state plane coordinate system. So they go get a state plane coordinate using, kind of the turn on and go, right? They'll localize on one of the monuments enough to get a state plane coordinate, and then they localize their surveys to that, and then rotate and calibrate and all that other stuff. But they find the benefit of that is some on the CAD level, right? It's easier to turn on that background image or share stuff or plug it into GIS, where if I ever have to deal with anyone else, my life is absolutely miserable because I'm trying to move something from mine to theirs or theirs to mine and try and figure that out. That's a whole other survey discussion. But again, the point, coming back to the point of this principle 3 is what precision was it done back then versus what precision are we doing right now? Again, this compass or a chain, right? What was the precision? Trent talked about that, right? We looking at our BLM manuals and the history of the BLM manuals, what was the precision they had to set that corner at originally? When you go to retrace that survey, and how has it been honored over the years? And that gets into the last chapter of evidence, where we discussed how do you weigh that evidence? How do you look at that and say, okay, this is good, this is not good? Any other questions, kind of comments on that one? That was some great discussion, guys. Thank you.
I just have one thing, Trent, and maybe I'll get everybody else's opinion too, but there's kind of a movement in the area where I survey to use GPS for a lot of boundary work. So let's say you're kind of retracing a right-of-way boundary for a road and there's some missing monumentation. Some people want to go and reestablish those monuments that were set sometime in the 20s and 30s using GPS. It hasn't been made a hard, fast rule, but I don't really agree with it. And so, yeah, just seeing what everybody else thinks.
Goes back to proportionate measurements, right? So that's kind of, I guess it would go, are you dealing with highway monuments, or are you dealing with like property corners along the right of way?
Highway monuments. So
that's a different story. Yeah, that's a different story.
What kind of, the first question I would ask with that is what kind of precision is required for those monuments? Are you in a dense urban situation? Are you out in agricultural land?
Well,
are you building hardscape? What's going on with the land? Because each one of those has different precision requirements.
Yeah, so basically the way the rules kind of read now is that any traverse that you kind of turn, it has to close within a certain parameter, a certain closing, and that goes by our state association. It doesn't really speak to the accuracy or precision of the the located monuments, but it's pretty universal. But this, kind of using GPS to locate monuments is a new thing. And I've just found a lot of inconsistencies using equipment or having consultants, report back, what they found in the field. And they're like, oh, we didn't use the right datum. We were on state plane, or we weren't. So.
Just as a matter of procedure, even if you're using longer observations and you post-process them, you can't really set a monument at 0.02 or 0.03 with GPS very easily. You need a total station for that. If you're if you're in a rural area where you have a 10th, still, I don't know, that's going to be hard to set the monument. I mean, what our guys do sometimes, they'll set the monument with a total station. They'll take a shot. If they're GPSing through that area later on, I still have them do 2 observations, usually like a 3-minute observations with high frequency, and the 2 different times of the day. And when we post process those, we can get error ellipses that are like within 300s, 200s by 300s, sometimes a little bit bigger, but you can't get those immediate results out in the field unless you're post processing. So you really don't have a very high level of certainty. If you need to set your monuments that precisely, you don't have that level of certainty out in the field while you're doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, locally, when you're taking your shots, it might look like you're getting that local precision on a GPS, but you're only doing half of the process that you need to go through to prove that your information is that good.
Yeah, we find that our best results when our crews go out and locate some monuments that might be slated for being removed for a construction project. We locate everything conventionally. We'll run a traverse through, close the loop and get accurate, sets of locations on each monument. Because we've had issues with GPS in the past. You kind of walk into the tree line and there might be a monument that has to be reset there. So we can't really trust that we're getting a good location or repeatable results,
Yeah.
And I see the same thing with virtual reference systems, VRS systems as well. State to state, the accuracy and precision of those varies. It's gone so far that if we're doing that type of survey where we're locating a monument to be replaced or anything of critical nature, is we're setting a base station. If we are comfortable using GPS in that area, we're setting a base station and we forego any VRS or control that is run by someone else, because we just don't know and we don't see the repeatability in that. There's other questions I have. We don't need to get into now, but there's definitely people that don't understand ground to grid on a corridor survey like that. And I've seen tons of bad errors on that as they're not scaling or are scaling when they shouldn't. And there's a lot of questions that pop up on that. But that's a good question. Anyone else have any input on that one? Any other questions there?
Actually, I just had a guy last week accidentally set a couple of monuments on pseudo state plane coordinates because he was just feeding the coordinates and he didn't know if he was working in grid or ground. And I verified those monuments when they came back to the office, and everything is pulling by about 4/10 in one direction. So I started digging, and he's like, "Oh, well, so I don't know what my job file was set to." So there's a lot of little settings that people need to pay attention to.
And as that 2022 datum comes out, a lot of these things will go away because all of the low distortions will be, basically the new norm, right? And so we've been lucky here in Las Vegas. We had one of the city jurisdictions went through and created a low distortion projection, and so that's pretty much their entire GIS system is based on a low distortion. So it makes it nice.
On the DOTs, if Jerry was here, he could tout this. In Wisconsin, every county has its independent coordinate system and made it really tight, low distortion per county. They have a great system there that are used and have procedures written. If you're crossing a county line, how do you address that in that coordinate zone, that coordinate system? I think that Sean, thank you for bringing that question up. I think if we jump to 4.11, that was another one we had highlighted. Or maybe we didn't have that highlighted. Principle 7, yeah. So 4.11, but principle 7. A surveyor cannot use more modern, precise techniques or measurements of course, angle, and distance to set a lost corner, but only as supportive or combative evidence in support or in contradiction of lesser evidence. So I already know that John's going to bring up what is a lost corner? Is it really lost? And, the whole discussion that might go along with that, because that's a that's a big question there. But this is one that popped out to me as I was reading through this chapter, that a surveyor cannot use more modern precise techniques and measurements of course and distance to set a lost corner. So foregoing the lost corner discussion, am I busting out my compass and chain to go set a corner that I believe to be lost but can recover?
And as John says, how do you know it's lost?
Yeah.
Did you go in a 500-foot radius to make sure it was lost?
And every survey around that section and 2 sections around it to see what anyone else has ever used to establish it, right?
I love it.
Yeah, it's just a matter of making sure that it is in fact lost, which means there is absolutely no evidence of its original position. There's no evidence, secondary evidence of that might lead you back to that position. You can't find any surveys local in the area that you could use to back in that corner with. There's nothing. You got nothing to go by except a bearing and distance from a couple of corners. And so you don't have any choice but to use the equipment you have to put it back in the most precise position that you can in a place where you know it isn't and never has been. And that's what you do with them. That's how you restore a lost corner. It always ends up relying on technology to put it back in. You're best to use the best technology you have at the time to do that with, to set it back with the best precision you can at the time, because there's no contradictory evidence whatsoever to say you're in the right or wrong place. Matter of fact, you can guarantee it's in the wrong place. But that's the way the law works. You have to be able to put it back, and you're going to use technology to do it.
I agree. You're going to use that technology then to document it, to make everyone else aware that you set a corner in the wrong location.
Yeah, as precisely as you could.
As precisely as you could. Or is that
you've given them precise measurements that they can go out and retrace and find the corner in its wrong position and accept it because it was placed there where it was supposed to not be.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. I just, that was one that definitely stuck out to me, that,
Yeah, I actually disagree with the principle entirely. Surveyor does use modern precise techniques and measurements to put in a lost corner, because that's all you've got. It's all you have. I mean, yeah, you could choose to throw away your GPS and not bring it out of the box, and probably not even bring out the total station. And you could grab a compass and a chain and run it out there and do it to your best ability and say that's as precise as you can get. Who's to say that's wrong? If it's the best you've got, I don't know. But I prefer to use the best equipment I have to choose from.
I mean, this to me in some oblique way sounds like they were trying to say don't create pin cushions just because you have better technology than you did at a time. So just because your corner doesn't fit by a radius that you expected, you can't call it lost.
Right.
I see Connie's Facebook post tomorrow.
My Facebook post tomorrow.
All about pin cushioning. Why is nobody reading this chapter so we don't have more pin cushions?
Or just because it's 12 feet off and you think it's a blender doesn't mean it's lost either.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that mean you found it?
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's awesome.
Well, I do appreciate the surveyor that did call. We're talking about that found stone. That was a 16th corner. I mean, it was the inconsequential of its consequential corners anyways he was trying to recover. But, he could have just thrown that out as lost and set a new one. But, he's at least doing his due diligence to find it. But shoot, the corn stalk at the corner of the row is as good as evidence of anything of that corner. But yeah, I thanks for the discussion, guys. I knew that would get some of us going. I don't want to spend too much time on that one, but I thought it was a great one. So
Yeah, you can get down some big rabbit holes on that one.
yeah. Okay, which other ones did we have highlighted here? We said 7, 8, an original corner once created cannot be replaced or redefined by coordinates created by modern survey calculations and measurements using more precise modern methods. I think that one kind of went with the other one, right? Is how are we then recreating that lost corner or trying to establish other corners? You know, we can do math down to the. I got a plat once that was done by an outside department. This is when I was in the electrical industry. It was one of our electrical engineers, and they had a drafter that had some downtime, so he quickly drafted up a plat for me, and it had coordinates to the 10,000th, coordinates and distances, and he gives it to me to redline. And you know, I chuckled. And, you know, the method that he thinks in, you know, when he's looking at ohms and calculations is, you know, again, middle of nowhere, Wisconsin or Iowa or something like that. It just doesn't matter, right? And so, you know, an original corner once created cannot be replaced or redefined by coordinates created by modern survey calculations. I would disagree with that just a little bit. I would say redefined. I don't know that I'd use redefined, not necessarily the right word, but it can be monumented more precisely so the next person can find it. I guess that's redefined, but I fail to grasp a word that kind of fits what I want to describe there. You know, a modern tie sheet to a corner that's always been there, right? And you can modern locate that's helped the next person get there easier and faster with modern coordinates.
Yeah, this is one of those principles that when you read monument in where it says corner, it starts to make more sense. It brings another light to it. An original monument, once established or fixed on the ground, cannot be defined by the coordinates. The coordinates will never become the monument. The coordinates will always be able to be a tool or mechanism we can use to go back to recover the monument position, but the coordinate is not going to be supplant the monument itself. So the coordinate position won't control, because bearings and distances, coordinates don't control over physical monuments. See, then it starts making sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks, John. Any other discussion questions on that one? Anyone want to bring up?
I'm still digesting that statement.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to jump over to, let's see, 10 or 11. I think it's 10 here. Just kind of going through here as we're getting towards the end of this. And still got plenty of time to talk about things, but an original line cannot be ascertained from a single corner, but the line must be determined from proving 2 original corners, 1 on each terminus of the line. And this is where let's bust out the BLM manual and let's talk about how they did it. This is, you know, how do we establish a line or redefine a line or a corner or a monument? You know, it's a factor of rotation. I've talked about this ad nauseum, but Davis County, here where I'm at, they've had a historic rotation to everything. But guess what? I did a plat last week that was on, it predated this rotation and it was on a whole other rotation. And I submit that to the city and they were at an absolute loss of what to do. A licensed surveyor reviewed it. And he was wondering why I didn't hold to the Davis County coordinate system rotation, but in the same breath asked me to rotate it to NAT 83, but I held it to the original subdivision rotation, right? An original line cannot be ascertained from a single corner, but the line must be determined from proving 2 original corners. You need to set a baseline. I think, you know, if we look at, I'm going to get on my soapbox here, but if we look at how we raise the next generation of surveyors up, if they've never turned on a total station, not just a robotic, but even an old total station, make them use non-robotic, they will never grasp this concept, right? I still think about it, even though I used GPS for most of my career, I was lucky enough to be mentored by some older school surveyors. And I had to go set out on that monument, that corner, and rotate in. And so in my mind, when I explain how the GPS works, what I'm doing is I am explaining the guiding principles of the original way we retraced, right? You rotate to a baseline, your horizontal angle right. And I know that I sound like my 7th grade math teacher when, you have to know how to do this by hand, but I have a calculator. Now I have a computer that does it for me. You have to know how to do it by hand to be able to understand what the equipment's doing and what the legal principles behind that are. I dare anyone to disagree with me on this one. Like, please do if you do. Love to hear your discussions and thoughts on that.
No, it makes perfect sense. I mean, for us, I think this is throughout California. On each map, you have to declare what they call the basis of bearings is. So it's either between 2 found monuments on your survey, hopefully 2 found monuments off of the same map, and you're either rotating your survey to that basis of bearings. And nowadays with GPS, we've moved to having your state plane coordinate system as basis of bearings, and you have to show how you arrive to your locations and bearings. You have a mapping angle that you have to declare, and a GPS diagram that shows what stations you started from and the angle between the stations and blah blah blah. So you can't just use an assumed north and say, oh, this is my bearing because I read it off of another map, because you may as well spin it like a clock and you could end up anywhere. Is what I tell my new people when they try to understand the concept.
Trent, I don't understand your Davis County rotation there. Yeah, in California, like Connie said, you got a basis bearings, hop on that basis bearings shown on the map and find your original corners out there, and that's what you're going to hold. So
Yeah.
we don't have that here in California. That's a little different. Can you explain that?
So yeah, I'd be happy to. So a lot of the counties, the more developed counties here in Utah, have township reference plats or area reference plats. And so essentially what they've done is, back in the 60s, 70s, they went through and they located every monument, every section corner in the county. And so you have this historic bearing between monuments, between corners. And so every plat and survey after a certain date generally use those as your basis of bearings. So if I were to go do a survey, the first thing I do is I open that township reference plat and I actually draw out in CAD the section, all the corners per that. And then I'll pull up deeds and I'll pull up surveys and plats. And 99% of the time, all those instruments, all those chains of evidence rotate to those section lines. The times they don't, it's usually a north along the section line call, and in which case I'm probably going to be rotating it to the current record bearing. Right. About a year and a half ago, the first part of 2020, a new law went into effect in the state of Utah, where the law is written that says all surveys must utilize the most current state plane coordinate system, written that way to kind of count into effect the 2022 or whatever system it ends up being, right? Davis County in particular had a bastardized 29 system that they used. The surveyor at the time kind of wrote that, and that's what's been used. And so there's this historic chain that everyone's been using this. Well, the county recorder's office and the county surveyor both interpret this law that says, well, you have to use a NAD 83 rotation on all your surveys and plats. And argue till you're blue in the face, they just won't record your plat, right? Your subdivision plat. And so we've come with, side story, we've come up with a good way of kind of counteracting that. We still hold to the original Davis County rotation. And then at the bottom of our description, we say NAD 83 bearing being blank per the township reference plat, right? So then they have that call in there and everyone's kind of happy, but we're still respecting history. So that's it in a nutshell. Is history, retracing the footsteps, is everyone's used this rotation for the last 50 years. And now someone who was smarter than everyone else has created a law that changes that. And then someone interprets that a different way.
Right.
History of the law was actually for a 911 dispatch in the more rural areas, trying to get the GIS, as it's a construction site that may not have a coordinate system yet, or an address. It's kind of how it started, and it got changed into this law that's just been a pain lately.
That's fascinating.
No, actually, it's not quite that way. When you read the law you're talking about is actually the definition of the 2022 NAD 83 coordinate system. When we put that in place to augment the 83 coordinate system, which augmented the 29 coordinate system. And it doesn't say that every survey has to be done on NAD 83. It says every system that is published, every published system has to be on NAD 83. So if the county comes up with a new system, it must be NAD 83. They can still use their old systems as they want to, and that's fine. And the real issue that I have in what I'm doing in Davis County is that, okay, I can say, yeah, I'm going to use this section line as a basis of bearing, whatever it is. I can use any one of 3 different Davis County bearings that are on that system, or I can use the deeded bearing on the system, or a subdivision, what was done in the 60s or the 40s, what it used on that thing. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to pick a basis of bearing, and then I show, okay, here's the bearing of this line as I've retraced it according to my basis of bearings. But then, yeah, here's the NAD 83 bearing, here's the Davis County bearing, here's the Davis County earlier bearing. And then when I go show their section lines, then they don't have the same rotation. They all have error in them. And the measurements I'm taking nowadays is more precise than any of the Davis County stuff that was ever done. So you end up with multiple bearings on it because you've got multiple surveys that are done at different points in time, and they all have a different bearing base. And that's just the reality of it. Davis County just needs to get off the pot and determine whatever they want to do as far as basis of bearings, but it doesn't really matter. We all have the same problem, and no matter what bearing you choose, they can come up with a different one. So
yep. Yeah, thanks for that small clarification, John. You're right. I summarized maybe a little bit too much what that law says, but
well, that's what they
yeah.
did too, and that's why they're having the problem they have is they've summarized or believed, well, this is what it means, rather than what it says.
Yep.
And they're saying now that every survey has to be, all your bearings on all your section lines have to be done on NAD 83. Well, yeah, I can do that, but it's not going to match a single rotation for Davis County system. When you've got 3 Davis County systems that all have different rotations and error in the section lines. So
the most interesting part of this is Joe Blow landowner goes and sells his meets and bounds description to someone else. The county then rejects that description because it's not rotated to NAD 83.
Yeah, the solution to that is don't rewrite the description. If he's got a deed for a piece of property, sell it with that description of that piece of property. There's no reason to ever have to rewrite that description.
Yeah, but they're rejecting it.
And
so anyways, let's continue on here. That's another animal that John and I get to deal with, and you guys are lucky enough not to have to deal with. I can get on my soapbox. I have fought that one in many ways. So
I highlighted
left, and
I highlighted a couple things on the end right here,
yeah.
which we've almost talked about it in every single chapter so far, right? And that's making sure everything is defendable and retraceable when it leaves your office, right? And I think that's this last two sentences here really summarizes it, right? And even to aid the retracing surveyor of tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And so those are some pretty key words right there, I think, that I wanted to highlight on that. So professional responsibility of placing the original surveyor who created the corners and lines in that creating surveyor who created the original valley should create, leave, and identify sufficient evidence so that the retracing surveyor will not have a difficult time finding the footsteps, finding the footsteps, whatever that originally created it. So I think that those are pretty powerful words, at least that even as technology changes, right? And even in the forms of field notes and plats and reports, whatever that case may be, leaving that evidence behind that shows where that is. And so I think those are probably summarizes this chapter the best. No matter how much technology is changing, you still need to have that evidence on the face of your map.
Absolutely.
One
Thanks,
little
Frank.
tidbit I'd like to add to this is I know we're all obsessed with numbers and field survey methodology and adjustment methodology. I get a lot of maps that everything is nice except it's so illegible that I can't read it. So all that technology becomes useless if somebody down the line can't read the map.
Add an extra sheet, right? So that use a different scale, add an extra sheet.
Yeah, just
Mhm.
people need to learn typography and yeah.
Well, and that costs too much money. Takes too much time, Connie. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to look at those record surveys and
Yeah.
corner records all day
Right.
long.
You
I was gonna
too.
say,
I know.
It's another $55 to record that sheet.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to
Not in the
retrace a
budget.
map right now that was prepared by a very reputable company that has stellar reputation, and 10 years old map, I can't read the numbers on it. They're too fuzzy. They're too thick, too close to the lines. Everything is smushed together. So it's kind of useless.
Yeah. Greg put in the chat, map making is a lost art. And that's for
Yeah.
sure.
I'm
That's
going to
for
write a
sure.
book
That's
about
correct.
it, I swear.
Yep. Truly
Yeah.
is.
Mapping
Man.
101.
Yeah, which, I mean,
Right.
originally, right, guys using CAD learned traditional hand drafting, right? Line weights
Mhm.
and textiles and that kind of stuff, and handwriting and penmanship and that kind of stuff. So
Leroy styles.
yeah,
Sizes.
so all of that has changed with CAD and CAD standards and that kind of
But
stuff.
as original CAD guys, we came out of hand drafting first.
Correct.
That's what we were
Yeah.
taught in school.
Correct. That's what I'm
was
saying. Yeah,
hand drafting, and then went to CAD. So we had that, but
exactly.
now they don't.
We
Yeah,
need to
no.
continue teaching it. Anyway, that's been the fly in my Cheerios today. Sorry for the digression.
Just gotta zoom in closer.
Yeah,
I see
exactly.
pixels.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's,
I see angry pixels.
as you talk about it, right? Scanning technology is getting better. So
Yeah.
but it, again, some of these smaller counties won't have the money to buy big,
Mhm.
better scanners, right? And so you're still going to be dealing with it, I guess, even for years to come. But that's
Yeah.
interesting. Crazy.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I want to jump down to principle 14. This is another one I could probably go down a rabbit hole and complain about counties across the country that require something like this on things, but every measurement has errors, some instrumental, some personal, and some resulting from tables used to obtain data for calculations. It is not a question that decimal points will make a measurement or a calculation any more precise. It is a result of what the precision of the original measurement and calculations. As a result, two numbers are merged to compute a third number, which is then used to calculate coordinates, which then are placed back on the ground with instruments that have errors of their own, which are different than the original monuments. I've seen a lot of survey maps, plats. There are a few counties in Utah that still require, cities that require a coordinate value to be placed on every corner on like a subdivision plat or a survey. They want to see that type of thing. And a coordinate value being the lowest of any evidence used, a coordinate value computed from bearings and distances is less precise, as it were, the original values from which they were calculated. So when we approach a survey, we approach coordinates. We talked about 5,000, 5,000, state plane, modified state plane. There's so many ways to screw up a coordinate The most precise thing we can use is the actual bearings, the distances, and then the other evidences surrounding that, right? The occupation, the parole evidence, the extrinsic evidence, everything we talked about the last 2 weeks. But these bearings, distances, and to a certain degree, those coordinates are only there to get us to the monument location. And they should not be held as some sort of gospel that the coordinate says it's here, but I find the monument over here. So which one is it? Because the coordinates recorded on the survey or this plat or whatever it might be, and they differ from each other. Right? That should be a non-issue, right? But yet it seems to be, and yet I seem to see it. I've seen it all over the country. People putting coordinates on a survey that to me make no sense. So more important are the original values from which they were calculated, bearings and distances and whatnot.
Well, and that coordinate value changes from every hour, right? And it's going to change with every epoch moving forward. And yeah, to some degree, the coordinates are irrelevant. That's the crazy part. So
yeah. Well, and those that are in the know, and this really gets outside my understanding of GPS technology and tectonic plates and everything that goes with it, right? I mean, we're seeing a shift across the United States. When we look at precise measurements, they can see the shift of land that goes across. I mean, it's only going to be 5 or 6 years before we completely lose California to the Pacific Ocean, right? And that's a whole other set of coordinate values. So how do we hold to those? Right?
it's funny, we've been saying that for like the last 55 years.
Yeah.
As long as we've been alive, yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we're moving at about what, 5 centimeters a year? Or yeah.
Inland
You
or
know,
outland?
Depends on which side of the
Down, I
fault
think,
line you're
up
in.
and down along the coast.
Yeah.
Unless you have an earthquake and just you get a quick shift of 5 or 6 feet. Who knows what direction?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it depends on which side of the line you're on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Which side of the San
California
Andreas?
was-
Yeah,
That's right. One's going north, one's going south.
exactly. Love it. That's awesome.
Okay, so go ahead, Connie.
Oh, we have a discussion right now at the state level about allowing coordinates to be part of a legal description, a part of the legal, which actually imparts constructive notice, where you don't have any additional potential qualifying calls to follow that legal description just by coordinates. And I'm still reading literature on it, so I'm not fully up to speed. But it just sounds like we're about to open a can of worms.
Oh, totally.
Kind of worms.
Greg, bad
Yeah, if
idea.
bearings and-
All
if bearings and
capitalized.
If bearings and distances can't control the boundary, coordinates is lower than that because it's a
Yeah.
result of the bearings and distances.
Yeah.
So any area
Sometimes-
you've got in the two, you've got in the third, even compounded.
How many people actually traverse through all the monuments, like in your average urban surveys? I mean, I'm seeing large majority, we set up local control and monuments at best end up being side shots, maybe a couple of side shots off of your local control points. So those original bearings and distances that you're declaring between monuments on the map are really derived from your calculated coordinates.
Mhm.
And on GPS, they're again derived from coordinates. You didn't actually run those lines in the field. So, but I know coordinate also leads to more error just with number transpositions. There's more numbers to keep track of and stuff as well.
Mhm.
Is that in legislation right now, or where's that?
It's a proposed legislation, and I can't really talk about it in detail because I've only skimmed through the paperwork. I need to read it this weekend to understand it better, because we'll be issuing some opinions soon and at our Orange County chapter level, whether we're in favor or against it or whatnot.
Do you know the House bill or the Senate bill?
I don't have it handy, but I
Okay.
can email you the
Yeah.
info.
Yeah, just shoot it to me. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Anyway, you guys, you can always go to legiscan.com. I think that's what it is, legiscan.com. And you can always just search in keywords like land surveying and coordinates. That's what we use a lot for when we get into our legislative sessions. here in Nevada. Just search a lot of bills. So yeah, legiscan.com, LEGI, and then scan.com. It's a great, great little website to just kind of go search, and it searches all 50 states for just keywords. Just type in surveying or anything like that, and you can kind of get a bunch of stuff. So we like, I like just kind of cruising through that every once in a while. You always get the Florida board trying to change their laws and stuff like that. You can type in by bill number, or you can just type in by text, like keywords and surveying and stuff like that. So
I actually see David Kendall in our audience. He's usually a little more up to speed on these things than I am.
Yeah, we need Mr. Woolley, don't we? He's all over that. He's
Well,
gonna be all over that one.
He was talking about it. Yeah, and I'm on the same board with him.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been a discussion.
Does that have something to do with the new 3-mile boundary legal description that they came up with, where they just put a bunch of coordinate positions and tried to create the 3-mile line off the offshore mile line?
Yes.
Yeah, it comes from that.
Yeah,
Because
and I'm
they
yet
have
to
a legal
read that
description that
article.
was
Yeah.
created on GIS, and it's nothing but a bunch of coordinates.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be I gotcha. Okay, so that'd be interesting to read that one then.
Is the next step just a CAD file as evidence? Like, just submit it to the public domain and like
An ASCII file. Just an
That
ASCII
is-
file. is all you need.
That is awesome. I love it.
oh man.
Let me stop sharing the screen really quick, and then I'll reshare. Let me see if I
You don't have to worry about sea level factor though.
can.
Line, 'cause
So here's the particular website and Legiscan. And so I just typed in California and I typed in land surveying. And so there's kind of all the Senate bills, the Assembly bills that kind of all come up. Anything to do. So I was actually curious about this one relative to National Surveyors Week, right? And so there was another one down here just a second ago. I ran into it again. I thought there was another one, National Surveyors Week as well. I thought it was in 2022, but yeah. So, but you can kind of pull up all the different text bills. You can follow along all on this website. It's a great website. So if anybody wants to check it out.
I know what I'm doing the rest of the night.
Oh yeah, you got a new rabbit hole.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, let me unshare. We can go back to the other one. Anything? What else we want to kind of finish with tonight? We're down to just a couple minutes, but
Yeah, I was going to just go over principle 15 with an understanding. We've kind of talked about this. Again, we get to these last few principles and some of them kind of bleed into each other and we've talked about them, but I think there's a couple just really key things to look at. With an understanding of the limitation of the original survey descriptions, modern technology can be used to support weak or questionable evidence quickly and with reasonable cost. It cannot be used as a substitute for evidence. And that just kind of, we talked about evidence and reading legal descriptions, and you've got ones that are written poorly, written well, illegible. We talked at the first of the hour about that, and a half degree or half minute, right? And what is the precision of that actual call? And so this kind of reiterates some of that, but he gives some good evidence here. I don't want to go through too much and just read it, but applying the Cooley dictum, the surveyor accepts offenses as the best remaining evidence of the most probable location of the position of the original quarter corner over the resurvey proportion location that is inconsistent with possession lines. The surveyor cannot say this corner is based on the recovery of the original evidence, but the surveyor can say the following. He's got some bullet points. I have 2 fences that are indication of possession based on title. I have a fence that measured within 13 links of record distance. I have an original line that was precise to within 50 links, and as such, the measurement is entirely possible. The proportion location places the proportion line some 25 links off the north-south fence line to the west. This is the strength of modern technology, the ability to get quick and precise measurements and to make instant decisions while within the field. I'm going to go on one more rant here real fast. And we'll read the conclusion. But the I talked about how do we train up, and this is great. We've got some heavy hitters in these classes, and the hope is, right, my hope, at least why I want to participate in this, is I'm learning from you guys, and I take this and I become a better surveyor, and in turn my crews become better surveyors. Mentoring Mondays that Trent also does, and those are geared specifically towards training, where we're going through a book and we're learning together and talking about it. But if we don't take this idea of modern technology and how we recover evidence with it, and that's, John, you said you didn't like the name of it. What I would name this chapter and rewrite it completely if I could is using technology to gather evidence. How do we utilize that to the best of our ability? I've got crews that are young and inexperienced, and they turn on the GPS and they want to go, it's not boundary stuff, but they want to go stake curb and gutter with the GPS because it's so simple too, and they're not used to setting up the gun. And I've got to get out. I'm like, no, you were going to go set up the gun because the precision of this curb is so flat. You've got to have the gun, or I'm going to be buying curb next week when it flows the wrong direction or has a belly in it. The same principle applies here. As we train our crews, as we work to get them better, we have to help them understand how they are utilizing that technology to gather the evidence. And then once they gather the evidence, we need to mentor with them and walk them through what that evidence means, right? We have to help them become the next licensed surveyor, so that, like I had some great mentors, but when I became licensed, all of a sudden I was, okay, here's evidence, make a determination. And I'm like, well, I've gathered evidence, I've drafted the evidence, but I've never connected the two and actually evaluated that evidence. And so, my challenge would be to you guys is, as you mentor and train your crews and your young licensed guys, is take this chapter, rewrite it as you would, but show them how they're using their technology, and then show them how you use their data then to come with a solution. Thanks, Greg. GPS curves, what could go wrong? Oh, there's nothing ever gone wrong with GPS curves. I've never bought anything. Yeah.
I think also kind of for closing this particular chapter too, we got to think that, Curtis Brown wrote this book in 1962, right? So 60 years ago, and think about the amount of technology that has changed in 60 years. And so, and the how close properties are becoming now, right? I mean, things were a lot more rural back then. Now we're building on top of each other. Although, I mean, this was basically a book out of, Curtis Brown was obviously from California. So, I mean, he was still kind of dealing with some high urban areas, even in 1962, but the book was designed to be across the whole United States. But it's just kind of hard to put into. This first chapter was written in 1962, and the evolution of technology in the last 60 years and how we're supposed to apply them today. It's hard to fathom sometimes, right? And then think about another 60 years from now, and we're up to the 28th edition of this book. So it's crazy. It's crazy to think.
I just want to read this conclusion real fast. I think this sums it up. It sums what John kind of talked about at the beginning. But they say this chapter is not written to discredit technology. It is written in an attempt to indicate that new technology and its results should not be used to the exclusion of higher and more conclusive evidence. It should not be used to the exclusion of all other evidence, but it should be used along with other technological tools, such as the transit, the compass, the chain, or other tools as a supplement to help support better or contradictory evidence that causes the surveyor to ponder and to have problems evaluating the evidence recovered. Technology by itself is not evidence. It is the resultant measurements from modern technology that can become evidence to corroborate lesser evidence that is conclusive by itself. There's companies out there that they get done with a lot survey, they throw up the drone and they take a picture of this is the current conditions at the time of the survey. You know, when scanners were new and everyone was trying to do it out, there were companies out there that would go do a traditional traverse the corner survey and quickly throw up the scanner and scan the conditions, even if they didn't process that right. Here is a blip in time of where this property is, the boundaries is, any of that, you know, that information. But it's the right tool for the right job. You know, GPS for curb, or, you know, the way we used to do it, set it GPS and level it with the transit, or bust out the gun, because that's, you know, the robotic toll station is precise enough. And pretty soon, who knows, we may not even be staking curb and gutter, right? That technology is going to get so tight that the contractors are going to use their GPS controlled ones to do it. Who knows? But as we evaluate the evidence of boundaries, we can take a lot of different tools in our tool belts, from research at the county to precision scans of our property to determine the exact angle on a fence corner, you know, in 3D to determine that's the property line bearing, right? So we've just got a right tool for the right job.
This would, how about this one? The art of, as a reference, the art of surveying and measuring land from 1688. We got to see if we can get a copy of that. Walt, so Tony Nettleman.
It's actually in the appendix of the book.
Oh, is it?
It's appendix B, I think, or something like that. He copied it into the book. Yeah, appendix D.
D. Oh, there it is. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a fun read, but John Love was a mathematician, and so it's all about math. And it's interesting because he references it back to the Egyptians and the flooding of the Nile, and them using and really defining or inventing or utilizing at least geometry to replace lost corners. Which is, yeah, if it's a loss, they wiped out all their evidence and all they've got is lost corners. You rely on the technology and the equipment and the geometry, the mathematics to put it back in. But it only applies to lost corners. Everything else is, no, what evidence do you have that it's obliterated or existent? And then how am I going to use the technology to report that position in a fashion that the next surveyor can utilize it and put it back if it gets torn out sometime.
Yeah, I just got to point out, Connie, how clear this scan is. You know, 1688, it's totally legible. So.
Right?
I love that. That's awesome. They had some good scanning technology back then. It's fine.
Yeah, he knew how to do his drafting.
You know, I missed that. I'm gonna have to go back and read this. This is fantastic. Yeah, there you go. Right, 300 plus years ago. Still talking about the same stuff we talk about today. Yeah.
That takes me back to my very first surveying class. I think everybody probably has a little bit of surveying history in school.
Yep. That's awesome. Very cool.
He says, yeah, I love this, according to the old way.
Yeah.
1688.
Still relevant
to
today.
The best way.
That is awesome. That's great. Well, that was cool. That was, hey, I'm glad we finished a chapter in a night. That's impressive.
Yeah,
that's great.
I love it. I love it. August 10th is our next one. So we will we'll be back on it again with that one, and we'll move to chapter 5, other types of or species of evidence. So that'll be another fun one.
That'll be a real barn burner there.
Yeah,
sure.
It's gonna be. I love it. That's cool. Well,
okay. Well, thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I love it, you guys. Good comment.
Thank you, everybody.
Of course.
This is fun as usual.
Absolutely. Awesome. Have a good night, everybody. Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, guys.